Dr. Doom was already in Avengers Endgame, not in armor, not on a throne, but standing quietly at Tony Stark's funeral. The camera lingers. Faces pass by in silence. No dialogue. No music cues telling you where to look. Just a quiet procession of people who mattered to Tony Stark's life. Every single person in that scene earned their place. And then there's him, standing off to the side, separated from the Avengers. Not interacting with anyone, just watching. That character is Harley Keener. On the surface, most people brush this off as a cute callback. Oh yeah, that's the kid from Iron Man 3. End of thought. But that explanation collapses the moment you ask a simple question. Why here? Marvel could have honored Tony's legacy in 100 safer ways. A photo, a line of dialogue, a reference in passing. Instead, they physically place Harley at the most sacred moment in the entire Infinity Saga. This isn't a random cameo. This is visual language. Harley isn't framed like someone paying respects. He's framed like someone observing the outcome. He stands alone, not with Pepper, not with Happy, not with the Avengers. The camera doesn't cut to him for nostalgia. It lets you sit with him just long enough to feel uneasy. And that's where this theory starts. Because if you know anything about Dr. Doom, you know he doesn't announce himself. He hides. He studies. He embeds himself close to power and waits for the moment where loss turns into opportunity. Tony Stark's funeral isn't just a goodbye. It's the end of one era of genius and the quiet beginning of another. This theory argues that Harley Keener wasn't there to mourn Tony Stark. He was there because a variant of himself just died. And the reason that idea feels so uncomfortable is because the scene itself already feels uncomfortable once you stop telling yourself it's just fan service. This is the most important funeral in the MCU. Marvel doesn't waste frames here. To understand why Harley Keener even works in this theory, you have to look at what Dr. Doom can actually do. Doom isn't just a man in armor. He's one of the few Marvel characters who fully merges science and magic without limitations. And buried deep in Doom lore is an ability most casual fans don't think about. Doom can alter his physical form, including his age. Younger, older, different appearances, different identities, all while keeping his mind intact. So when we meet Harley Keener in Iron Man 3, the details start to feel strange. Harley isn't written like a normal kid. He's unusually sharp. He keeps pace with Tony Stark verbally. He fixes tech on the fly. He understands engineering concepts far beyond his age. And most importantly, Tony Stark respects him almost immediately. That doesn't happen by accident. Tony doesn't bond with random people, especially not during one of the most paranoid, unstable points of his life. Yet Harley becomes the one person Tony actually syncs with in that entire movie. They think alike. They problem solve the same way. They even joke the same way. This theory suggests that's because they share something deeper than chemistry. They share intellectual DNA. If Doom wanted to observe a variant of himself who grew up differently without Latveria, without tragedy, without hatred, disguising himself as a younger mind would be the perfect way to do it. No suspicion, no threat, just proximity. And that explains why Harley never feels like a side character. He's not there for comic relief. He's not there to be saved. He's there to assist. Almost like he knows exactly what Tony needs before Tony does. Which leads to another uncomfortable question. If Harley was just a kid, why did Tony keep him in his orbit afterward, sending him advanced tech, keeping in contact, making sure he was set up for the future? Because Doom wouldn't disappear after the observation phase. He'd stay close, watching how a Stark variant thinks, how he builds, how he fails, and eventually how he dies. And that brings us back to the funeral. If Doom had been hiding in plain sight all along, aging himself down to observe Tony from the inside, then Harley standing at that funeral isn't random at all. It's the end of the experiment. And the moment Doom realizes that Tony Stark chose sacrifice instead of control, which for Doom is unforgivable, this is where the theory stops being cute and starts getting dangerous. Most people assume Dr. Doom would be a Tony Stark variant. Same face, same mind, same genius, just twisted by circumstance. But this theory argues the opposite. Dr. Doom is the constant across the multiverse. Tony Stark is the deviation. In most timelines, that level of intellect doesn't grow up joking, improvising, and relying on charm. It grows up obsessed with control, order, and inevitability. It becomes Doom, a man who believes the world only survives when he is the one making decisions. Tony Stark is what happens when that mind is softened. Money instead of Latveria, freedom instead of exile, love instead of resentment. Same intelligence, completely different emotional wiring. And if you're Doom, that version of you is fascinating, because Tony represents something Doom fundamentally rejects. The idea that sacrifice is stronger than dominance, that you can save the universe by letting go instead of ruling it. That's why Doom wouldn't see Tony as a rival. He'd see him as a failed outcome, a version of himself who had every advantage and still chose to die. That reframes everything. Harley Keener wasn't helping Tony because he admired him. He was studying a path Doom would never take, watching how a mind like his behaves when it believes in others Avengers instead of itself. And that makes the funeral scene hit differently. When Harley stands there watching Tony's coffin, this theory says he isn't grieving a mentor. He's processing data, calculating outcomes, realizing that a universe trusted the wrong genius. Because Doom would never accept Doctor Strange's claim that there was only one way. Doom always finds another solution, another timeline, another strategy. If Tony had lived, Doom might have continued observing, but Tony died, and that changes everything. From Doom's perspective, the multiverse just proved his philosophy right. Heroes who hesitate lose. Heroes who trust fate die. The universe needs someone willing to take control permanently, which is why this theory claims Avengers Endgame isn't the end of Tony Stark's story. It's the moment Doctor Doom decides the experiment is over. No more observation. No more waiting. No more letting variants choose weakness. Tony Stark's death isn't a tragedy to Doom, it's confirmation. And the next time Doom steps into the light in Avengers Doomsday, it won't be as a newcomer. It'll be as someone who's been watching the MCU from the inside the entire time, waiting for proof that he was right all along. If this theory is even partially true, then Harley Keener's presence at the funeral isn't symbolic, it's necessary. Dr. Doom wouldn't just want to know that Tony Stark died, he'd want to see it. Doom is obsessive about outcomes. He doesn't trust secondhand information reports or narratives shaped by others. He verifies. He confirms. He watches the end of things himself, especially when it involves a version of his own mind. And that explains Harley's placement in the scene. He isn't mixed in with the Avengers because he doesn't belong to that world emotionally. He isn't standing with Pepper or Happy because he isn't mourning. He's positioned as an outsider by design. Someone who's there to witness, not participate. That's classic Doom behavior. What makes this even more unsettling is that the camera doesn't rush past him. It lets you see him. Not enough to draw attention, but enough to register. Marvel wants that image to exist in your subconscious. A lone figure, disconnected, watching the coffin lower. If Harley really had stayed in contact with Tony after Iron Man 3, then Doom would have known what Tony was working on. Time travel, multiversal theory, fail-safes layered on top of fail-safes. Tony never worked in isolation. So, from Doom's perspective, Endgame wasn't just a heroic sacrifice, it was a failure of imagination. Tony Stark, with all his brilliance, accepted a single solution. Accepted fate. Accepted that his death was required. Doom would never accept that premise ever. That's why the funeral is the breaking point. Up until that moment, Doom could still justify observation, still justify staying hidden. But watching Tony die, watching the universe celebrate that death as noble would be infuriating to someone like Doom. Because in Doom's worldview, dying for the universe isn't heroic, it's inefficient. And once Doom reaches that conclusion, the rules change. From that moment on, he wouldn't be content letting the multiverse unfold naturally. He wouldn't tolerate Avengers improvising. He wouldn't trust sorcerers gambling on probabilities. He would take control, which is why this theory frames the funeral not as an ending, but as the trigger. The moment Doom stops being a shadow in the MCU and starts becoming its inevitable consequence. If there's one moment in Avengers Endgame that Doctor Doom would reject outright, it's Doctor Strange claiming there was only one future where they win. That idea runs directly against everything Doom stands for. Doom doesn't accept inevitability. He doesn't accept fate, and he definitely doesn't accept being told there was no better solution. From Doom's perspective, that statement isn't wisdom, it's intellectual failure. A man like Doom would instantly ask the questions no one else does. Why was there only one outcome? Who decided that? What variables were ignored? What sacrifices were accepted too easily? And most importantly, why did it require Tony Stark to die? If Tony is a variant of Doom, then his death isn't just tragic. It's insulting, because Doom would believe that with the same intellect, the same resources, and the same time, he would have found another way. A way where the universe survives, and the genius at its center lives to rule it. That's why this theory says Doom doesn't blame Thanos most of all. He blames Strange. Strange didn't search for every solution. He searched for a survivable one. Doom would search for a dominant one, and watching the universe accept Tony's death as the price of victory would confirm Doom's deepest belief. Heroes are willing to lose everything as long as they can call it noble. Doom doesn't call that noble. He calls it weak. That's why Harley's expression at the funeral matters so much in this theory. It isn't rage. It isn't sorrow. It's calculation. The look of someone quietly thinking, I would have done this differently. And once Doom reaches that conclusion, Doctor Strange stops being a protector of reality in Doom's eyes. He becomes a liar, a man who settled for the one future he could live with instead of the one that truly saved everything. Which is why Doom's eventual rise isn't about revenge. It's about correction. Correcting a universe that allowed its greatest mind to die because someone said there was no alternative. To Doom, that's unacceptable. And once that belief sets in, the Avengers aren't heroes anymore. They're proof that the world needs someone smarter, someone colder, someone willing to make the choices they couldn't. While the Avengers were grieving, healing, and trying to move forward, this theory says Doctor Doom was already thinking 10 steps ahead. Tony Stark's death didn't just leave an emotional void. it left a power vacuum. The smartest man in the room was gone. The one person who could outthink and outplan everyone else was removed from the board. Doom wouldn't see that as tragedy. He'd see it as opportunity. Because now, no one was watching the ceiling. Think about what happens immediately after Endgame. The Avengers disband. Governments step back in. Oversight collapses, magical threats rise, multiversal cracks start forming. The world becomes fragmented, exactly the kind of environment Doom thrives in. And if Doom had already been embedded as Harley Keener, he would have had access to something priceless. Tony's ideas. Not blueprints, not suits, philosophies, half-finished theories, multiversal concepts Tony never got to fully explore. Time travel was just the beginning. Tony always built with the future in mind, and Doom would understand those notes better than anyone. That's the scary part. Doom doesn't need to reinvent the wheel. He just needs to finish what Tony started without the emotional limitations that held Tony back. No hesitation, no guilt, no sacrifice unless it benefits Doom himself. This theory suggests that while the world moved on, Doom stayed focused, studying the consequences of Endgame, watching how the multiverse destabilized, tracking how heroes reacted when Tony wasn't there to fix things. And that explains why Doom doesn't emerge immediately. He waits. He lets the cracks widen. He lets the Avengers fracture. He lets reality prove his point for him. By the time Doom finally steps into the spotlight in Avengers Doomsday, he isn't reacting to chaos. He's responding to a system that failed exactly the way he predicted it would, which leads into the final, most important idea of this theory. Doom doesn't see himself as the villain of the next saga. He sees himself as Tony Stark's replacement, not as Iron Man, not as an Avenger,